Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders. I'm your host, Jonathan Sarr, and today we have with us Kathy Williams, and we are going to be talking about single family housing. We're happy to announce that we now have a new course specifically for single family housing, and more information will be available in the show notes. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Please remember to sign up for our newsletter so that you can be up to date with all the fair housing complimentary education that we provide. And please also follow us if you are on social media on Instagram at Fair Housing Institute. If you're seeing this for the first time on YouTube, we welcome you to subscribe to our channel and give us a thumbs up for this program. So, really important topic, a huge sector within property management. So we're glad that you're available, Kathy, to really help us dive into some different situations that are in single family housing and getting your feedback to help that sector within property management. So let's start it off, Kathy, with what are we talking about when we use that term single family housing?
Well, hello everyone. It's great to be back to talk about this topic. And I think why it's important is that sometimes people that own or manage single family houses think that they do not have the fair housing obligations that multifamily housing owners and managers have. So, for instance, we're talking about someone who owns a home and decides they want to rent it out. And there are all kinds of companies, real estate agents who will manage the rental of that house for the owner. And that happens to be a fairly large and I think growing industry in this country. So the idea and why we wanted to do this training video was to remind both the owners and the companies or individuals who manage those single family homes what their responsibility and their potential liability is under the fair housing laws. And by the way, one more clarification point. We are talking in this video about long-term rentals, not short-term rentals. And if I was going to make a difference between those, I would say the short-term rentals are the Airbnbs and the VBROs, whereas long-term rentals are maybe 6 months to a year leases. And when we get into that, that's what we are talking about in this training video.
All right, very good. Yeah, thank you for making that clarification. Perhaps in the future we will have another video about those particular types of management. We know that's another growing sector in our industry. So focused on long-term single-family housing. So let's take a look at our first kind of a scenario, Kathy. So if I own the home where I live and I have a couple of duplexes as an example, as investment properties, do the fair housing laws apply the same to me as it would for a multifamily apartment community?
And this is the most important message we need to get out. And the answer is yes. All of the fair housing laws that apply to an apartment complex, a giant apartment complex, apply to individuals who own or manage single family homes, unless in some small instances, the owner, never the manager, but the owner might be exempt. And let me list when that occurs. And it's in really a very limited number of situations. So if the owner, excuse me, owns 3 or fewer units, so a duplex would be 2 units. Maybe the home they live in is the 3rd unit. So if that's all they own, then the owner is exempt. If the owner owns a single family home where the owner lives, and two duplexes, that's 5 units. The owner is not exempt, and all the requirements of fair housing apply to that owner, and they're always going to apply to the management agent that they might hire to operate those rentals on their behalf. The only other exemption, I just want to quickly mention this doesn't apply very often, is if it's a small apartment building and there are 4 or fewer units and the owner lives in one of those units. In that instance, the owner is exempt when they rent the other 3 units in that small apartment building. That's about it for exemptions. And one reason I hate to talk about exemptions, and if you've seen my training before, you'll see I never talk about exemptions, is because it's easy to think you're exempt under the Fair Housing Act, but in the federal Fair Housing Act, but maybe the state Fair Housing Act is much tighter and has, for instance, fewer units that you can own before you lose your exemption. So that's one concern. The other is there are other federal laws, like the law that says you can't discriminate racially when you contract. And that law might catch you if you think you're exempt and are going about doing something that is discriminatory. So just be very careful. And I would get direct legal advice before you think you're exempt. Otherwise, I would learn this material and operate and assume that you are not exempt, just to be extra careful you're not going to get caught in some kind of liability.
Okay, very good. That was a lot to chew on. So, my takeaway recap 5, and be very, very careful and making sure you get legal counsel so that you clearly understand what you're exempt from, what you're not exempt from. So that's good. There was a lot there. So thank you, Kathy. So let's look at another scenario. So this one, so here I am, investor Jonathan. I own 6 single family homes I've purchased over the last 10 years as an investment. I've hired a real estate company to handle these by leasing them, collecting the rent, keeping the houses and yards in good condition. In other words, I'm not really involved other than just being the owner collecting on my investment. Why should I know anything about fair housing? And shouldn't that just be the responsibility of the real estate company or property management company that I've hired?
You know, I think a lot of individuals who use single family rentals as some type of investment might believe that. However, that's not what the law says. The law says if that, let's say, real estate agent discriminates in the way they are managing your properties, you are liable as the owner, as is that management agent. You never can walk away from liability under the Fair Housing Act if you are the owner. So that's why if you're going to own housing as an investment, you need to have some basic understanding so that when you hire a management agent, you can make sure they understand all the laws that are going to be applicable to how they manage your property without discriminating against somebody.
Very good. Thank you for that, Kathy. Okay. Appreciate that explanation. So another one. So I manage I manage many condominiums in a lovely community on behalf of individual owners who have decided to rent their units. Many of the owners feel a special attachment to the units because they have purchased the condo to live in it and later have moved to a different home while deciding to keep the condo as a rental investment. They often have strong feelings that they don't want a renter to have an animal or modify a bathtub into a shower. It's my job to keep the owner happy, not the renter. So if the owner objects to these requests, I feel I must deny the renter's request. So interesting scenario, quandary. What would be your comments to this situation, Kathy?
When when I was practicing law, this was one of the most common questions I would get from folks who were either on the board of a management company or are on the board of the owners of condominiums or on management agents who operated a lot of condos on behalf of the owners. And that is, the owner doesn't want me to do this. Um, can I not do it so I can please the owner? The answer is, if the Fair Housing Act says you have to do it, then you either have to do it or assume the liability that might happen if that renter files a fair housing complaint. The most common is about assistance animals. A lot of folks don't want animals in their condo. And therefore, someone comes forward, a renter, and says, I need an emotional support animal. The owner says no. If the agent or the management agent says no, that might be a violation of the law. And that would put both the owner and the agent in for potential liability. So that's when sometimes you can't follow the directions of the owner, you have to follow the directions of the law. That's what probably needs to take precedent.
Okay, thank you for that, Kathy. Okay, so let's take a look at our fourth scenario. So the fourth one, again, Jonathan, investor here. I plan to move from my home, which is in a very nice neighborhood, but maintain the ownership of my home. I want to rent it out as an investment. I'm not moving very far away and plan on remaining friends with many of my neighbors. I feel I have a responsibility to make sure the purchasers qualify to live in such a beautiful community. Can I describe the qualifications of a renter in social media advertisements as persons who are Christian, established in the community, and middle age or older people should apply? What do you think, Kathy?
Okay, so, we started out this episode by talking about exemptions. And from this description, we don't know whether this owner is exempt from the Fair Housing Act requirements or not. However, it doesn't matter when it comes to advertising. No one is ever exempt from advertising in a discriminatory way. So this owner cannot go on social media or any other platform and advertise his house in a way that suggests a religious discrimination, a discrimination against families with children, discrimination against national origin, which this idea of being established might suggest. So, again, if you're not sure about what those buzzwords are to avoid, we have a wonderful video about discriminatory advertising, and you can look at that. But everybody has to avoid advertising in any way that suggests a discouragement against any of the protected categories. So just remember that. Doesn't matter whether you're exempt or not, you cannot discriminatorily advertise.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. All right, in our last scenario, as the Jonathan property management investment guy, I manage a number of single family homes in my duties as a real estate agent. Since the owner trusts me to maintain their houses, I decided to adopt a policy of limiting the number of children who can live in the homes. Since, we know that children can do a lot of damage to both the houses and yards where they live. My rule is that including the parents, no more than 2 children can live in the house. With larger families, there's just too much work to do when they move out. I think my rule is reasonable since it's my job to maintain these houses. What do you think, Kathy? Am I in trouble?
This is one of the more complicated fair housing issues, the question of occupancy standards. How many people can live in a rental unit? Those concerns, those fair housing concerns, apply to single family rentals. And generally, the rule is you cannot limit the number of children. You can limit the number of occupants. And usually, how you go about doing that is looking at the number of bedrooms. And you also need to add other rooms that may not be classified as a bedroom, but could technically be used as a sleeping area. Most of those rules are reasonable. We're not talking about kitchens and living rooms and bathrooms or walk-in closets. We're talking about dens or libraries. Sometimes finished basements, if they have windows, could reasonably be used as a sleeping area. And so, even if it's a two-bedroom, let's say townhouse, with a bed or a basement that's fully developed, then you would increase the number of occupants per unit by two more. There are other considerations in the area of occupancy restrictions. And again, we have some educational videos on that, and I encourage you to look at that. But don't think because you are managing or owning a single family rental that the rules under familial status do not apply to your unit, because they do.
Very good to know. Thank you, Kathy. Lots of good scenarios, and we, as always, appreciate your explanation and clarification. I think everyone listening to this episode who is either in single family or is thinking of adding single family properties to their portfolio have greatly benefited from your insight. Okay, so now we are on to our another exciting component of our Fair Housing Insider Show, which is our Fast Five, where you could win 1 quintillion fake Monopoly dollars if you get all of these questions answered in less than 90 seconds. So, are you ready, Kathy?
Jonathan, I'm all of our trainers. I am the worst on this one, but I keep trying. So let's do it again and see if I can't get my answers under the time limit this time.
All right, well, here we go. If I am renting a home I used to live in, can I manage it however I want?
And that is a complicated answer, which basically I would say no. You better be careful. Find out whether you're exempt or not. And even then, you have fair housing requirements because of advertising. So the short, safe answer is no.
If a resident makes a reasonable modification because of a disability, such as changing a shower into a bathtub, can I require the resident to change it back when they move out?
And the answer to that is generally yes. The renter would pay for the modification and is also supposed to pay to have the modification reverted back to whatever it was originally, if that modification is going to interfere with the next renter's use of that property.
Are there any fair housing rules that apply to apartments that do not apply to single family rentals?
And this is the most important point we're trying to make. All fair housing rules apply to single family owners, management agents that apply to multifamily housing, unless the owner is exempt. And then the exemption only applies to the owner. It never applies to the management agent.
If I hire a management company to operate my single family homes, why should I worry about fair housing?
You should worry about fair housing as an owner because liability always imputes to both the owner and the person or company that made the violation. So if your agent violates fair housing, you're going to be held liable. So you should be concerned about that.
If I own the small apartment building in which my family lives, I'm exempt from fair housing. Can I advertise that families with children should not apply?
And as we explained in the video, even if you are exempt, no one can discriminatorily advertise, even if they're exempt. So the answer is no, you cannot discriminatorily advertise.
Okay, thank you. Very good main points. And unfortunately, my dear friend, no 1 quintillion fake monopoly fair housing dollars. But I will say for those complicated questions, those fast five, you were at about 2 minutes and 30-ish seconds. So that's really, 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 really good. Considering the depth of those questions. And I know our audience is very, very grateful to you, Kathy, as always. When you're available to be on the show, we appreciate your insights and helping us take a deep dive into single family rentals. So we appreciate you being on the show today. So for our audience, just keep in mind that we now have a new course for single family rentals, and this applies to owners, to property managers, to realtors, landlords. More detail will be in the show notes for you to take a look at this course, and it will really help you understand the fair housing and how it applies to this genre of property management. So we're so happy to announce that we've added this to our course catalog. So thank you again for being here on the show. Again, be sure to sign up for our YouTube channel, sign up for our newsletter. And we thank you for being here. Until next time, this concludes this episode of the Fair Housing Insiders. Take care, everyone.